today is the first day of the rest of the year. Half of the year is gone and half to go. And before we know it, it'll be the next year.
And then our Christmas party, I hope so.
Christmas, please.
I'm ready.
You have Christmas in July. No, July.
So anyway, I feel like that I need to give equal time because I am a proponent of buying American, as I think you all are aware and familiar. And especially my hobby horse is buying American automobiles and not buying automobiles from countries where the root is in idolatry. Okay? But I have an article here that I brought, and I've shared this with some of my men friends, but I wanted to share it with the rest of the class this morning. I'm just going to read a little excerpt from it. It's what the article is about, the top 10 most made in America vehicles. And that list is dominated by, it almost chokes me to say it, by Honda. Honda is the most American-made vehicles.
Well, thank heaven.
Wait a minute, it's made in America, but it's run by Honda.
Yeah, it is, and there's a paragraph in this article, and let me just read this one paragraph, and I'll read another excerpt or two, but it says, the way the American-made index has been built, you get it? The way the index is set up, it was built to reflect U.S. economic impact. You can't tell what the U.S. economic impact is based solely on the brand. The global nature of auto manufacturing means parts can be sourced from all over the world, then produced domestically. And here's the key phrase. With profits funneled to headquarters in another country. Yeah, that's what our Sunday school teacher has said over and over and over again before there ever was even an index like this, is that the profit on the transaction goes to a country where the company's roots are in idolatry, not in Christianity. Anyway, it also gives a little bit of more information with American-made names, and one of those is that the absolute bottom of the list is the Buick. Only 2% of the Buick is made in this country.
2%.
2%.
So is it kind of like the Ten Commandments? You screw up with one.
Yeah.
And you're done.
Yeah.
So the old saying, it's not your father's Buick is.
So I don't
is
understand
true.
this,
Yeah.
the point.
No, it's not your father's Buick. Anyway, here's one more little paragraph, and then I'll get on to lesson type things. It says the exact formula for the index is kept a secret. The Detroit-made Chevrolet Volt ranked 5th. So the highest American-made name car is in fifth place, and that's the Chevrolet Volt. You know what that is?
An electric car,
Little electric car.
but it's gonna save the world.
But the Chevy Corvette out of Bowling Green, Kentucky ranked 10th.
That's all my Corvettes.
Yeah.
It's okay.
America's best-selling vehicle, the Ford F-150, made in Missouri and Michigan, ranked 9th.
Yep.
So there you go. Now, having said that, again, the key is in supporting the country in which we live.
It's like we're gonna buy a Honda.
No. Don't even drive a Honda, let alone
I know,
buy
probably
a
Yamaha.
buy one. It's because the profit off of that sale, I'm talking about new cars.
Oh, I know.
Okay. The profit off of the new car goes to Japan. Okay, now, if there's used automobiles that are getting traded around among our people here, there's no profit on that.
They already
except-
made their profit.
Yeah, that profit's already gone.
Somebody else's.
The good part about all of this is that if you're driving one of those automobiles, even that is a forgivable sin. God's grace,
Can we still be friends?
yeah.
We can still be
Still
friends?
be friends.
Okay, excellent.
God's grace will extend even
Absolutely.
to that.
That's definitely not the worst thing I've done, so.
But, John, you were talking about what people could do, and there's things every day that you do that people don't realize that you can buy American-made products. You can go in the grocery store. Just the other day, we were looking at the spices, grocery store, and there are American-made spices, and there's spices made in other countries.
Yeah,
And you have a choice. Yeah, it's a little 50 cents more, but you have that choice. You always have choices of buying American-made products. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's really hard, with electronics and things like that, very difficult. But some things, you still have a choice, and you can make that choice of buying in America, and most people aren't conscious of that. And they
Yeah.
just buy whatever's cheapest.
yep.
And I think that's really what the bottom line, what you could do as an everyday thing.
Well, our president's gonna fix that with tariffs.
If you can get them through.
Price of cars are gonna go up.
The
Okay.
question still remains then, what do we do?
Well,
Even if we're driving an American car, do we go home then and purge our homes of, I don't know everything, but I probably have at least a fourth of my house that's not American made. What do you,
No,
what
no,
do you do? Do you not buy your electronics and things, or do you not buy? I mean, my home, honestly, I'd have to purge my entire home.
so the real, the
Me
real,
too.
yeah, the real problem is, it's difficult to be only a little bit pregnant.
Yeah, there you go, that's.
When you've already bought something, the damage is done.
Yeah.
It's like what Paul said, you stay in the situation that you came, just like somebody who married somebody they were already married to someone who wasn't a believer. You're already there, you don't go out and get a divorce because you're not married to a believer, And that's essentially what he's saying, the damage is already done, you've already bought whatever you want. There's no point in going back on that, there's nothing you can do, it's already done.
Yeah, but Paul wasn't here for last week's lesson.
If he missed it, didn't he?
Last week's lesson, we put away our strange wives.
Yeah. But,
He might be listening.
Maybe,
He might be listening.
probably not,
Probably not, but he might be.
yeah.
But that's the point, is that whatever you've already done, the thing is to try your best to just, I think that's the main thing, it's just like grace, you do your best.
Yeah,
And the more you talk about it, the more we're conscious of it, the more you can help the situation. You're gathering rather than scattering.
yep. I think that. Well said. Even William agreed.
They said amen.
All right, I want to take pick up where we left off last week in the book of Nehemiah. So please open your Bibles there. I'm going to start at the beginning of chapter 2. While you're looking for that, let me tell you that we don't really know who wrote the book of Nehemiah. There are two suspects. One is Ezra, whose name you've heard consistently for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and the other is Nehemiah. But the general thought is that Ezra wrote what we now call 1st and 2nd Chronicles and the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah, because all 4 of those books were in ancient days one work, and it got divvied up into the 4 books that currently make up the canon as we know it. And so in general, we think that Ezra wrote the book of Nehemiah. But throughout the book, the personal pronoun of I and we is, both of those are used consistently throughout. So perhaps Ezra was the writer, but Nehemiah told him what to write. None of this matters. It's just the kind of thing that I want you to be aware of, and I want you to be aware that I'm aware of, because in past lessons I have made reference to the writings of Ezra and Nehemiah when they may have been just Ezra. Don't know for sure, and again I say that doesn't really matter. Let's go back to where we were and back up a couple of verses or so and talk about the occupation of being a cupbearer. Right at the end of chapter 1 of the book of Nehemiah, and verse 11, right the last line, Nehemiah is saying, "For I was the king's cupbearer." Now, I explained to you basically what that meant, and what his obligation was to be the, for lack of a better word, the wine tester for the king. Now, it extended beyond just wine. If it was goat's milk or whatever that the king was going to drink, even if it was iced tea, okay? The cupbearer would partake first, right? And if the cupbearer lived, then it was okay for the king to drink this stuff. So let's look up to verse 1 of chapter 2. It says, "And it came to pass in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him," before the king Artaxerxes. And he says, "I took up the wine and gave it unto the king." Now, I had not been beforetime sad in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, "Nehemiah, why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick?" Now, I'm pausing there to let that sink in. The king recognized that Nehemiah had not suffered any ill effects from drinking of the wine. So, okay, Nehemiah, why are you sad? Seeing as how apparently the wine was good. Okay? So there's an indication to us of what the responsibility that the cupbearer had. Now, the other thing about being a cupbearer is that was not I think this goes without saying, that that was not a desirable position. That was not an honorable position. Because the people they used to do this wine testing were disposable. I mean, what if the wine was poison? They don't want to give it to their best-looking, strong, He-Man kind of a guy and kill him. They won't give it to the old, pot-bellied guy or somebody that's crippled or maimed in some way, because if the wine kills him, okay, they hadn't lost much. Okay? So that gives us some insight into Nehemiah. Okay, now, over the years of being in this class, you have heard me talk about God choosing weak little guys, even when the Scripture doesn't say so. And my best example of that is Samson. And I keep saying Samson was just a 90-year-old, skinny, scrawny something or other. Otherwise, the people would not have wondered how it was that he was so strong. Okay, Nehemiah is in that category. He must have been. Now, there's nothing in the Scripture that says this. I'm just gleaning it from knowing the occupation and knowing what he was doing. It was also his responsibility and everybody else that worked for the king to be cheerful. You don't go before the king grumpy. You don't go sad. You don't go out of sorts. You don't go argumentative. You are agreeable. You are happy. You are cheerful, whether you want to be or not, if you're working for the king. So that's the condition that Nehemiah, in all of his, whatever his physical situation was, but I want to believe that he was not the strongest, best looking Mr. America kind of fellow to be the cupbearer, okay? So the king said unto me, verse 2, why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? And then the king goes on to say, I discern this is nothing else but sorrow of heart. And when the king said that, the last line of verse 2, then I, Nehemiah, was very sore afraid. And the afraidness comes because the king didn't want somebody in his presence that wasn't cheerful and happy and sad. Cheerful and happy and sad. Cheerful and happy and having a good outlook. Okay? He didn't want somebody in his presence that way. So when Nehemiah realized that the king, he knew the jig was up. So he said unto the king, verse 3, let the king live forever. Please, king, please. Why should not my countenance be sad when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? He's talking about Jerusalem. Okay? Now, let me also say to you that Nehemiah had never ever in his whole life been in Jerusalem. He was born in captivity. He was born and raised up in a servant family, and in that servant capacity became the king's cupbearer. Otherwise, he would have never been able to have been in that king's presence. So he fits the category of being born for such a time as this. Okay? Now that phrase is made famous by Queen Esther, and the prophecy that was made over her that she was born for such a. Okay, Nehemiah fits that same kind of thing. He was raised up in a servant family, otherwise would have never ever been in the presence of the king. So the king in verse 4 perceived further, then the king said unto me, for what dost thou make request? The next line is important. Nehemiah said, so I prayed to the God of heaven. Okay, please understand the circumstances. The king has asked Nehemiah a direct, quick question. Well, what request are you making, Nehemiah? And the next line says, Nehemiah prayed. Do you suppose he prayed out loud? No. No. He would have, within himself, just like you and I do from time to time when there are circumstances we recognize that are not godly or whatever, or whether we're in danger or who knows what, that inside ourselves we'll ask for God's help. And it's a very quick, little, easy prayer. It's not a time when you thank God for your food, when you thank God for your Aunt Jessie, when you thank God for your job, when you thank God for all the children, when you thank God. It's not one of those things. It's just, oh God, under this, right now, I need your help. I need strength. Okay? That's what I think that Nehemiah was saying there. So then, after having wished the little prayer silently, I said unto the king, verse 5, if it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldst send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. And the king said unto me, with the queen also sitting by him, for how long shall thy journey be? And when wilt thou return? Now, basically the king was saying, well, I'll consider it, but tell me, when are you going and how long are you going to be gone, when you'll be back? I think Nehemiah had been a good cupbearer, and he somehow had found favor in the sight of this king. So it pleased the king at the end of verse 6 to send me, and I set him a time. That just means I told him, I can be ready, I can be packed and ready to leave by this coming Friday, and I'll be gone 6 months, and I'll be back. I don't know the time. It's just that I'm giving you an illustration of what that latter part means. Verse 7, moreover, I said unto the king, if it please the king, let letters be given me to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over till I come unto Judah. All he's saying is, king, would you mind writing letters of authority that I can carry with me and show to the rulers, the governors of the land that I'm going to have to travel through, that it's okay?
It's hall pass.
It's hall pass. There you go. And it gets better as we read here. But it says, and a letter unto Asaph. So this is still Nehemiah asking, not just for letters to the governors, but also a letter unto Asaph, who is the keeper of the king's forest. Okay? That would be, I guess, the president's secretary of forestry. Agriculture, something, I don't know. But some helper here, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the palace, which appertain to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into. And the king granted me, according to the good hand of my God upon me. that last phrase, according to the good hand of my God upon me, kind of refers, I think, back to that silent prayer that he prayed. He said, God help me. Okay, now if you look back now to chapter 1, verse 11. And I'll read the whole verse, but it's towards the end that I am pointing you right now. O Lord, verse 11, I beseech thee, let now thine ear be attentive to the prayer of thy servant, and to the prayer of thy servants who desire to fear thy name, and prosper, I pray thee. Prosper thy servant this day, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. And I pointed out to you when I read that last week that at the time we're reading that, we don't know who this man is that he's asking for mercy in the sight of. But later we find out that it's his boss, the king, that he's asking for mercy in the sight of. So he not only had that prayer, but he had the little prayer in verse 4 of chapter 2, right at the end. So I prayed to the God of heaven, which we've among ourselves kind of decided that was a silent, soulful, quick little prayer in fear. Nehemiah is afraid because the king has saw him sad in his presence. Thinks he's going to lose his job or whatever. But the king does grant him favor, does give him letters to the governors, does give him a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest. And Nehemiah is giving God the credit for all that. Right at the end of verse 8, he says that it's according to the good hand of my God upon me. Now, folks, there are so many lessons in here for you and I today to see how that we can have a relationship with our God, that we just work for Him. And we can talk to Him silently, and we can ask for favor, and He will respond with that favor. Verse 9. He doesn't talk about packing up and getting ready on Friday to leave, but he talks about his journey all of a sudden. Then I came to the governors beyond the river, and I gave them the king's letters. Now, the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. Now, that sentence is what I was referring to later, or a little while ago, when I said that later it gets even better than the king giving him letters. He sent him the Secret Service. The Secret Service traveled with him and surrounded him and kept him safe. Now, listen, I'm telling you, Nehemiah as the cupbearer was a nothing. He was an absolute nothing. But he has the king's favor. And he got that, or at least in his mind he got that, because of my God's good hand on me. Okay? Now, I've got my guard with me, the last sentence of verse 9. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. All right, now is when the trouble starts. Verse 10. I'm on my way, and I come into the territory of Sanballat the Horonite, and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite. And when they heard of it, meaning when they read the letters, it grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. Okay, these guys, Sanballat and Tobiah, you know them. Their name hasn't come up yet, but you know them from earlier lessons because they are Samaritans. They're not Jewish. They're not Hebrews. They're not Israelites. They are half-breeds, okay? And Sanballat is the governor of the Samaritans. He's the leader of the Samaritans. And he's not taking kindly to the fact that there's a man that has come along that's going to seek after the welfare of the Hebrews, the Jews, the Israelites, the people of Jerusalem. Does that sound familiar? I mean, we're talking 20, in round numbers, 2,500 years ago that this occurred. And in the last few months in this country, we've experienced the same sort of thing, where a man said, we're going to move the embassy of the United States of America from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, that is mischaracterized in the news over and over and over again, because they talk about it as though our president finally declared Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel, or the capital of Israel. Well, President Trump didn't declare Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel. Never ever did he. God did. All these years ago. And the people of Israel right now have always understood and believed that the capital of Israel was Jerusalem. All that happened was that President Trump recognized that the capital is Jerusalem and that we should have our embassy in that location. Now, do you remember what happened? The news was the fake news, all the news was very Johnny on the spot to make sure everybody in the whole world knew and recognized what this meant to the whole world, that the United States is recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
But it's even more than that, because it was already declared. It was already declared before Trump to be the capital, and most of the presidents for a long time have put that on the back shelf.
Yeah.
And didn't take care of business, but it was declared by the United States as the capital for a long time.
It's not the United States' job to declare Jerusalem as
Well, I
the
mean,
capital.
it was they had meant to move their embassy for
That's
a
right.
long time. Let me rephrase that.
That's
The
right.
embassy was supposed to be moved 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It's
It was
all
all
true.
supposed, and all those presidents just kept putting it on the back
Right.
shelf because they didn't want to take it head on.
So what happened after our existing president moved it was there were protests all over creation. There was people up in arms. And all I'm saying to you is that that's the same thing that happened in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 10, when Sanballat the Haranite and Tobiah the servant the Ammonite, when they heard of it, it grieved them exceedingly. And what they did was they sent protesters into the street to protest this welfare for the citizens of Jerusalem. And he kind of leaves it there. Whoever wrote this kind of leaves it there, whether it was Ezra that wrote it or Nehemiah that wrote it. But verse 11 says, "So I came to Jerusalem, and I was there 3 days." And then there's a new paragraph starting with verse 12, and it starts to tell us about his activities once he arrived there. "So I arose in the night, I and some few men with me. Neither told I any other man what my God," I added the word other, you might have noticed. "Neither told I any other man what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. Neither was there any beast with me, save the beast, or except the beast that I rode upon, which was probably a horse, perhaps a donkey. So I went out by night, verse 13, by the gate of the valley, before the dragon well, and to the dung port. Now, there's so much stuff I could explain or describe to you here that would maybe make this more meaningful. We just don't have time. In the middle of verse 13, I viewed the walls of Jerusalem at night, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. So all he saw was the ashes of the wooden gates. Then, verse 14, I went on to the gate of the fountain and to the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me. In other words, the beast that I was riding upon. There was no place for him to pass. So it got too treacherous there. Okay? Now, please understand that throughout history, all towns, for the most part, were built on the sides of cliffs. They were built not out in the plain, not where enemies could come from all sides, but they were built on the side of a cliff so that if an enemy coming from that way would have this hard terrain to get up to, okay? So all he's saying here is that this part of the Jerusalem wall that had been torn down, he's in that treacherous part of territory where even his horse couldn't walk, or even his donkey couldn't walk, or whatever kind of animal that he was on. So then I went, verse 15, up in the night by the brook and viewed the wall, and I turned back, and I entered by the gate of the valley, and so returned. And the rulers, the mayor and his people, the chief of police, whoever, the rulers knew not whither I went or what I did. Neither had I as yet told it to the Jews, nor to the priests, nor to the nobles, nor to the rulers, nor to the rest that did the work. So the only people that he had told what he was doing was those few guys that he took with him. In verse 12, it says, I arose in the night, I and some few men with me. Well, we don't know particularly who those fellows were, and it doesn't really matter. It's just that there was a small committee of guys who went out to look at the broken down walls under the cover of night, so that the rulers of the city or whatever, the enemies, Sanballat and Tobiah, the Samaritans, so that none of them would know what I was up to. Verse 17, new paragraph starting there. Then said I unto them, Ye see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come, and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we, the Judeans, be no more a reproach. Then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me, as also the king's words that he had spoken unto me. And they said, Let us rise up and build then, Nehemiah. Yeah, we're with you. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. Verse 19. Here's the enemy again, the Samaritans. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, enters a third guy, Gesem the Arabian, when they heard it, they made fun of us and despised us and said, What is this thing ye do? Will ye rebel against the king? Now the king they're talking about is the king of Samaria there. The people. Remember when, last week's lesson, when Nehemiah's brother, who had been over to Jerusalem, when he returned to Nehemiah, or to Iran to visit Nehemiah, and Nehemiah just in conversation inquired, how are the Jews doing in Jerusalem? How are things going? And they said, oh, it's all laid waste. There's nothing going. We're under reproach. And Nehemiah said, what? And that laid heavily on him. And he said, I have to find some way to get to Jerusalem and rebuild it. And now, today, we've gone through that exercise of what he went through with the king, of whom he was the cupbearer, and he got permission, all that sort of thing, got authority to go. Verse 19, but when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant the Ammonite and Geshem the Arabian, when they heard it, they made fun of us. They despised us and said, what is this thing that you do? Will you rebel against the king? Then answered I them and said unto them, the God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build. But ye, you Samaritan half-breed, no goods. Wow, I added that.
You smack down on that.
Like, that's sure what?
That's from
That's
last,
the New John version.
that's from last week. But ye have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. Now, we're to today's lesson. Earlier than we were last week. But let me tell you that today's lesson starts with chapter 4. It skips chapter 3. Now, I'm gonna briefly summarize chapter 3 for you as to what here was Nehemiah's plan for rebuilding the wall around Jerusalem. He said, Brad, you get your people. You start at I-45 and you build the wall up to Doyle's Ace Hardware. And he said, Jim Lee, you get your family together and your people and you start at Doyle's Ace Hardware and you build down the street to Spring First Church. And he said, Mike, you get your people and you build from Spring First Church to Whataburger. And don't stop there. Just keep building. And Kendall, you get your people, and you start from Whataburger, and you get the idea? That's what chapter 3 is all about, with all these hard names that we're skipping. But Nehemiah's plan here was to build the wall in little groups. Okay? And that happened. All right? That happened. And that's what we're going to study. That's what we're going to read about today, starting with chapter 4.
That's a good lesson. We all need to have skin in the game.
Yeah, that's absolutely a good lesson. Skin in the game. I already made Brad mad.
He's getting ready to build.
Is he going to build?
I-45, I'll let you know how I'm doing.
Up to the hardware store.
Up to the hardware store, I'm after it.
Okay. Got it.
Stop
Got it.
Starbucks on the way.
Yeah.
Something from Whataburger.
Hey, one other thing, Brad.
Yes, sir.
Daryl is already out there somewhere building.
You want me to look
He
for
got
it?
a head start.
Okay.
He's not.
Maybe something to eat.
Maybe he's getting something to eat.
I don't know. He might be.
I'll look for it.
Whataburger. That's Whataburger. He's a Whataburger. Okay. Verse 1, chapter 4. It came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth, and he took great indignation, and he mocked the Jews. And he spake before his brethren and the army of Samaria, and said, what do these feeble Jews? What do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? That means they're going to build that wall? And then, if they get the wall built, will they then sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? Now, Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, even that which they build, it's gonna be so weak that if a fox go up, just a fox shall even break down their stone wall. See the fun they're making of God's work and of God's people? And we've got that today. We've got people that are protesting out there, they're holding up signs that talk, that say bad things about Christians. It's the same. Nothing changes. People are the same today as they were back when. And then Nehemiah prays again, verse 4. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their reproach upon their own head, and give them for a prey in the land of captivity, and cover not their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out from before thee. For they have provoked thee to anger before the builders. So his prayer concludes there. He prayed for his enemies. See, we're taught in the New Testament to pray blessings on our enemies. But Nehemiah wasn't praying any blessing on his enemies. He was praying, God, go before us, take care of us, protect us. Don't let their sin be blotted out. And even for that matter, let them get taken into captivity. And then be the prey.
There was a lot of racism in those days.
There was a lot of racism in those days.
Thank God we don't have that no more.
Yeah, I'm glad that. So, verse 6, so built we the wall, and all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. So every one of the leaders of the families of the groups, they got their people motivated, and they built their wall. And later we'll see that they built the whole wall around, they rebuilt the whole wall. I'm telling you, they rebuilt the whole wall around Jerusalem in only 52 days. Now, it was roughly 2.2 miles, or 2 2/10 miles in length. And they built it in 52 days. We need them on our highway construction crews. That's not in the scripture anywhere, right? Verse 7. But it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up and that the breaches began to be stopped, then they were very wroth, and conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder the project. Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God, and we set a watch against them day and night because of them. Now, what that's saying is that when these guys heard that we were building in the early part of these 52 days that it took us, these guys decided they were going to protest. But they were going to not just protest, they were going to get violent. Now, we got the same thing going on today, where in this country, some of the leaders are advocating violence against the opposition. Yeah. Harass them. Yeah. Harass them. Throw them out. Don't let them have any peace. Go to their homes and yell all night long so they don't get any sleep. That's the kind of... Nothing changes. This was 2,500 years ago. And anyway, so here's what happened. While they were building, while Brad had his group, Daryl had his group, Jim had his group, Mike had his group, Kendall had his group, and Tom had his group, and I didn't have a group. Everybody, there was enough other people build. I didn't have to. That's a joke. Y'all were supposed to laugh at it.
I was thinking of a rebuttal.
Yeah. So here's what happened. The middle of verse 9. we set a watch against them day and night because of them, meaning because of the noise they was making, the protests that they were making. We were going to set about to build a wall. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
And does it sound familiar that there's people objecting to that? Okay, so here's what we did. Judah said, verse 10, the strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed, and there is much rubbish, so that we are not able to build the wall. They're getting in our way. And we're just, they're throwing trash there that we have to pick up. These guys were, I don't know if they had dump trucks or wagons of some kind, and they was hauling trash to the building site and just dumping it there. And that meant that the workers had more work to do than they started out doing. They had to clean up and use their strength to clean up the stuff that the enemy was causing them. So verse 11, our adversary said, let me read it again. They shall not know, neither shall they see, till we come in the midst among them and slay them and cause the work to cease. So basically what Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, and what they're saying is, we're going to go kill these guys that are working on a wall. We don't want a wall to be built around Jerusalem. So we're going to see that they don't build it. Verse 12, and it came to pass that when the Jews which dwelt by them came, they said unto us 10 times, they said it, 10 times, from all places whence ye shall return unto us, they will be upon you. So, Nehemiah is from somewhere else. All he knows about Jerusalem is what he saw at night when he went out and looked at and surveyed. But the ones who lived there, the Jews who lived there, came to him and they told me 10 times. They told me, if they told me one, we say that to our kids, or we did when our kids were small. Listen, if I told you once, I told you a dozen times. Don't do that. So that's what basically Nehemiah is saying here, is that these people who live here are telling me, and they told me 10 times, that if we aren't careful, the enemy is going to come upon us and keep us from building. Therefore, new paragraph, verse 13, set I in the lower places behind the wall and on the higher places. I even set the people after their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. So, he said, Brad, while you're down here from I-45 to Doyle's hardware store, you have some guards looking out for you. Have spears and have bows and be ready for this enemy. So some of you are on watch. It says set a watch. Where did it say set a watch?
Verse 9.
Nevertheless, verse 9, we made our prayer unto our God and we set a watch against him. Okay, that's what he's talking about. He's not talking about watch, like setting time. He's talking about he's setting somebody to watch for the enemy to come up behind them. Okay? And I looked and I rose up and said unto the nobles, unto the rulers, unto the rest of the people, be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord. The Lord is great and terrible. And when you remember the Lord, you fight for your brethren. You fight for your sons. You fight for your daughters. You fight for your wives. And you fight for your houses. So the instructions to these that are watching for the enemy to come, while others are building. Okay? And it came to pass, verse 15, when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, that it was known unto us, their plan was known unto us. We knew they were coming. And when they found out that we knew about it, and that God had brought their counsel to nothing, to naught, that we returned all of us to the wall, every one unto his work. And it came to pass from that time forth that the half of my servants wrought in the work, and the other half of them held both the spears, the shields, and the bows, and the habergeons, and the rulers were behind all the house of Judah. And the rulers being behind, that just meant that the leaders were agreeable. Okay? That didn't mean they were hiding behind them or something like that. But they were behind this plan of rebuilding the wall. Verse 17. They which builded on the wall, and they that bear burdens with those that laded, every one with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. For the builders, every one had his sword girded by his side, and so builded. And he that sounded the trumpet was by me. That's just saying that that in an army fight, the captain says to the trumpeter or the bugler, blow. And when he blows and that sound is heard, that means charge.
Isn't it, from what I gathered from, I think, verse 13, that they actually were kind of, the warriors were hiding so that they couldn't see them, and that they were kind of in lower and higher places. They built behind the wall for those guys to hide with their spears and everything, so that when they came, they would think they're just going after the workers. That's the way I read it.
And it doesn't mean that to me. To mean that, what it means to me is that he just covered the whole territory, meaning the low places and the high places.
So they
But
could see, you're saying they could see them?
Oh yeah, they could see them. That's why they didn't come on them.
Okay.
Is they knew that they were there. So verse 19 says, and I said unto the nobles and to the rulers and to the rest of the people, the work is great and large, and we are separated upon the wall, one far from another. In what place, therefore, ye hear the sound of the trumpet, resort ye thither unto us. Our God shall fight for us. He's just saying, when you hear the trumpet sound, come to that, wherever the battle is. Everybody's going to gather. In other words, it's not likely that the enemy is going to attack Brad's group and Jim's group and Mike's group and Kendall's group and Daryl's group and Tom's group and John's group. They're not going to attack us all at once. They're going to attack what they think is the weakest spot. And so when you hear the sound of the trumpet, everybody come to that spot, and we'll drive the enemy away. Verse 21. So we labored in the work, and half of them held the spears from the rising of the morning till the stars appeared. So I'm just saying all day long. Likewise, at the same time said I unto the people, let every one with his servant lodge within Jerusalem, that in the night they may be a guard to us, and then we'll work or labor on the day. So neither I, nor my brethren, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard which followed me, none of us put off our clothes. They said we wore our clothes. We never really went to bed. We just slept standing up, leaning against the pole, leaning against the wall, slept the best we could, but we had our clothes on, except, and I don't know why he puts this one little thing there, it says, saving that everyone put them off for washing. So he's letting us know that they at least took their clothes off and washed them when they were dirty. But then we were on the ready all the time.
Only once a month.
Yeah, only once a month. It's like taking a shower whether you need to or not. You know,
Right.
Yeah.
It was only twice.
You wouldn't need it that often.
Yeah. And there was, in chapter 5, verse 1, and there was a great cry of the people and of their wives against their brethren the Jews. For there were those, I'm going to add the word those, there were those that said, we, our sons, and our daughters are many. Therefore we take up corn for them that we may eat and live. So there were some assigned the task. This would have been Ricky Self. Ricky Self. He would have been the one bringing the corn or the food to the workers working around the wall. And he probably had helpers too. He couldn't do 2.2 miles.
We're all glad it wasn't me.
Yeah, we're all glad it wasn't me too, yeah. My can opener broke. Verse 3. Some also there were that said, we've mortgaged our land. Now this chapter, chapter 5 is kind of odd being in here, and I'll just summarize it for the lack of time, but there were some of these Jews who were well off, and there were some who weren't so well off. And the some that weren't so well off, in order to have sustenance, had to borrow. In the middle of verse 3, it says, we've mortgaged our lands, we've mortgaged our vineyards, we've mortgaged our houses, that we might buy corn because of the dearth or the drought. There were those also that said, we've borrowed money just so we could pay taxes, the king's tribute. And that tribute we was paying was upon our lands and vineyards. So we had to borrow money just to pay our property taxes. Now, again, I say I'm going to summarize this chapter here, but there were some of the people that were very well off and some that were just the opposite. And when Nehemiah became aware of this, he recited the law to the wealthy ones and said, look, don't treat your brother this way. We all treat one another the same. We're all equal. And the good part about it is that the rich or the wealthy or the well-off Jews listened and said, okay, we will restore to the poor. We will give, we will support, we will return their lands that have been mortgaged to us. We'll let them have the crop off of their own land. Again, that's just a summary, and it's the short version because of time. We've got, let me tell you, one more lesson in Nehemiah. Starts with I think chapter 7. Is it chapter 7? So we've got, no, it starts with chapter 8. So we're skipping chapter 7 because today's lesson goes through chapter 6, although I barely got into chapter 5 and summarized it. The rest of, and probably I'll start somewhere along in here, but closer to the beginning of chapter 6 next week, and try to get 6, 7, and 8 done. At least 6, 7, and 8, even though the lesson goes all the way through chapter 10. They don't give us enough time for all of the material. It's just either that or I just talk to or both. You know, I don't know. But thank you for being here. And are there any other thoughts or comments or questions or criticisms? Then let's pray. Lord, we indeed are grateful and thankful to you for your goodness to us and your mercy to us and your blessings on us. We've come to this place to not only learn of you, but to worship you, and we're gonna worship you in the name of Jesus of Nazareth, who indeed is the Son of the Almighty God. Amen. God bless you for being in his house today.